G'day, I'm David from Creative Content. For over 40 years, I've been writing, reviewing and creating tutorials on technology. This long experience has taught me that no matter how advanced, how smart or how complex any tech is, the basics never change. And this is especially true for photography and video. So I'm creating this series of quick tutorials covering the fundamental things all video makers and photographers need to know, but sometimes beginners find a little hard to figure out. My aim is to explain in an easy to understand and interesting format how to make better photos and video. The subject of this tutorial is the camera's aperture. Also called the iris in video terms, the aperture is the opening in the lens that lets light travel to the sensor, and it is this sensor that forms the final image. More light getting to the sensor, the better the image. Along with its companion setting, depth of field, understanding the use of aperture settings is vital in getting the best images. This diagram shows different aperture settings. Without getting into the optical mathematics involved, aperture is measured in f-stops, and the smaller the number, the wider the aperture and the more light can reach the sensor. Many basic cameras have a fixed aperture. A GoPro, for example, is fixed at f2.5, and a Samsung Android smartphone has different apertures for each of the available lenses, ranging from f1.8 to f2.4. Conversely, my Fujifilm X-S10 mirrorless camera with this lens on it has available settings from f2.8 up to f22. Now it might seem obvious that if you can have a wider aperture, if there is less ambient light, simply open the aperture. Well, yes and no. Tied into the equation is the sensor size. These are the sizes of the sensors for medium frame cameras down through full frame, micro four thirds, to GoPros and beyond. GoPros are notoriously bad in low light as the sensor is tiny, so even with a relatively wide f2.5 aperture lens, it is too small to pick up the needed light. This is why when shooting video at night, GoPros drop to a slower frame rate, allowing each frame to get as much light as possible. But the aperture also has a major effect on the depth of field. Depth of field is described as the distance between the closest and furthest objects in the image that are in focus, and is one of the most important concepts in photography and video. In short, the wider or lower the number of the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. This is best shown by way of example. In this first video, shot using my Canon 5DS with a 200mm zoom lens with an aperture of f5.6, the model train is in focus in the distance and stays in focus for a very small part of the journey towards the camera. This demonstrates a shallow depth of field. At the other end of the scale though, using the same camera at f16, the model train is in focus for a much longer time, showing a wider depth of field. But you'll notice the image is darker due to less light being let in. Also important is the focal length of the lens in use. Wide angle or short focal length lenses, such as used in a GoPro, have a deeper depth of field, so much of the image is in focus. The opposite usually applies to long focal telephoto lenses, where the subject is in focus but the background is not. This is why with GoPros you cannot get bokeh portrait photographs, where the subject is nicely focused and the background all fuzzed out. To get that effect, you need a camera and lens combination that allows a very shallow depth of field. If your camera allows you to change the aperture, the very best way to learn is to simply play with each of the aperture settings and focus and learn the best combinations for different scenarios. On some camera lenses like this on the Fuji X-S10, the aperture is changed using a ring on the lens. On others, like the Canon 70-200mm zoom, it is done electronically via a thumb wheel on the camera body. As they say, practice makes perfect. If your camera does not allow you to change the aperture, GoPros and DJI action cameras for example, then you have to shoot within the limitations of the camera and understand there are simply some things these cameras are not designed to do. That's a very brief overview explaining aperture and its companion depth of field. I hope you found it useful. I'll be adding more and more of these quick tutorials, so please check back often. The next video I'll be discussing shutter speed, along with using it to obtain slow motion effects. You'll also learn how shutter speed can be tied to aperture and depth of field. Once again, I'm David from Creative Content. I hope you hit the like button and also please subscribe to this channel. This will let you know when new tutorials are available. And do leave any comments or contact me on david@creativecontent.au. All critiques and brickbats, as well as compliments, helping make these tutorials better and address the subjects that you want. Until next time, thanks for watching. Oh, one more thing. If you use a GoPro or other action type camera, I think you'll like my free 60-page e-magazine. You can download it from my website at www.creativecontent.au and select the option in the menu bar.